Montana's dry winds carried more than dust. They carried a cry, sharp and trembling, that no one in the town wanted to hear. A young woman, her face bruised, her arms clutching to newborn babies, was punished for the sin of giving life. In the silence of the cold night, her pain echoed louder than the church bell, yet doors stayed shut, and windows closed tighter. No neighbor came, no friend spoke, for fear ruled heavier than compassion. But far across the barren land, a rancher rode alone, his heart heavy with his own scars. He had buried his family years ago, and loneliness had been his only companion. When he heard her muffled sobs, something inside him broke open. He could not turn away. In a world where cruelty was the law, he decided to break it, and with steady eyes he whispered, "You're coming with me." Montana was no land for the weak. It was a place where winters cut through bone and summers burned the skin, where men ruled not with kindness, but with fists, and silence was safer than truth. In a town of wooden saloons and dusty roads, a woman moved quietly through the shadows, her arms wrapped around two fragile newborns, their tiny cries smothered against her chest. Her eyes carried no light, only exhaustion and fear. For every breath she took felt like an invitation to another beating. The people knew they saw, but they turned away, for in this place, pity was dangerous and compassion came with a price. She had no family, no friend, only the fragile warmth of the babies pressed against her bruised body. Yet even in her brokenness, there was a strength, a silent plea for rescue, waiting for someone brave enough to hear her unspoken cry. She walked through each day with the weight of silence pressing against her chest, hiding her babies from the violent whispers that crept through the crooked streets of Montana's forgotten town. Behind every shuttered window, eyes watched, but no hands reached to help. For in a place ruled by fear, kindness was seen as weakness, and weakness was not forgiven. Each evening she would press the twins close, their tiny breaths against her skin the only reminder that love still existed in her world of bruises and broken bones. When the night fell and the winds rattled the wooden walls, the cries of her babies pierced the darkness, and though she hushed them gently, she knew their sound could draw danger closer. Her strength was fading, her body thin and weary, her spirit scarred by cruelty, but still she endured, because their survival meant more than her pain. She hid them beneath torn blankets when footsteps approached, whispering promises of safety that she barely believed herself. Yet the babies calmed at her voice as if they understood she was their only shield. The townsfolk whispered that she should have abandoned them, that a woman alone could not raise two mouths to feed, but her arms never loosened, and her heart never surrendered. She bore every lash of words, every strike of hand, because in their eyes she saw hope, fragile but unbroken. Some nights she thought of running, vanishing into the wilderness with nothing but the stars as her guide. But the land was cruel, and she had no horse, no food, no friend to offer shelter. So she remained, trapped between the walls of her torment and the promise of tomorrow, clinging to the hope that someone, somewhere, might hear her unspoken cries. Her body ached as she carried water from the well, her bruised arms trembling, as she balanced the weight with one baby pressed against her chest, and the other swaddled near her side. Hunger gnawed at her, but she starved so they could feed, giving every scrap of bread to their tiny mouths while she swallowed nothing but her tears. The nights were the worst, for shadows stretched longer, and every sound outside her door became a threat. Dogs barking in the distance made her heart race. Boots striking against the dirt made her shiver, and drunken laughter from the saloon carried reminders that no place in this town was safe for a woman like her. Still, when her children stirred, she smiled through her pain, rocking them softly, humming broken lullabies through cracked lips. She imagined fields of grass, skies without dust, and a world where their cries would be met with love instead of punishment. And though the town treated her as nothing, she whispered to her babies that one day, somehow, someone would come, someone who would see them not as a burden, but as a reason to fight. And in that fragile hope, she kept breathing, even as everything else tried to silence her. Far beyond the edge of town, where the grasslands stretched endlessly under the pale Montana sky, a rancher lived alone, carrying scars deeper than the lines on his weathered face. Years ago he had lost his wife and child to sickness, and since then the world had felt hollow, the silence of his empty ranch echoing louder than any storm. He spoke little, kept to himself, and though people in the town remembered his name, they rarely saw him, for he rode only when he needed supplies, always with his head pulled low and his eyes fixed ahead. On one such day, as he passed through the dirt road lined with crooked houses, his gaze caught the figure of the woman. She stood near the well, clutching her babies with trembling arms, her face bruised, her eyes red with exhaustion, her body swaying as though it could no longer carry its own weight. Something in that moment pierced through his hardened shell, because in her eyes he recognized the same loneliness that had lived inside him for years, the same silent cry that no one dared to hear. He stopped his horse and watched as people turned away from her, ignoring her pain as if it were nothing, their cold indifference reminding him of the night when no one had come to his side. As his family slipped away, he dismounted slowly, boots pressing into the dust, and though she tried to look down, afraid of any man's attention, he did not move closer. He did not speak harshly. He only stood still, giving her space, yet letting her know she was seen. For a long moment the world seemed to pause, the sounds of drunken laughter fading, the clatter of wagon wheels distant, and in that silence the only thing that mattered was the broken woman holding her children. He noticed the way her hands shook when she lifted the water, the way she winced when the weight pressed against her ribs, the way her eyes darted around as if danger lurked in every shadow. He had lived with ghosts long enough to recognize the signs of a soul on the edge of breaking. The rancher felt the ache of his own solitude pressing against his chest, and he knew he could not ride away, not this time. He had lived years avoiding the world, but here was the world staring back at him, demanding a choice. Without words he shifted, his presence alone offering something no one else in the town had given her acknowledgement. And though he was a man shaped by grief and silence, he decided that silence had lasted long enough. He would listen, he would stay, and for the first time in years, he felt a purpose stirring within him, fragile yet undeniable, as if fate had placed him in this town at this very moment, not to remember his pain, but to answer hers. The night was colder than the others, the kind of night where the wind scraped against the wooden walls and even the stars seemed to hide behind clouds, and she moved slowly through the dimly lit room, her arms trembling as she tried to hush her babies, their cries soft but restless when suddenly the heavy boots returned, the fists struck harder, and her body gave way beneath the cruelty that had become her life. She fell to the floor, clutching her children, her cheek pressed against the dirt, her breath shallow, her eyes swimming with tears that refused to stop, and for the first time she wondered if she would ever rise again. Outside, the rancher who had carried silence in his heart for so many years felt a pull he could not ignore, and when he saw her collapse, something inside him snapped with a force stronger than grief. He stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the doorway, his eyes locked on the trembling woman and the two helpless infants she shielded with her battered frame, and his voice, though quiet, carried the weight of a promise no one had ever given her. "You're coming with me. No one will ever hurt you or your children again." The words struck her like a thunderclap, not of fear but of disbelief, for no man had ever spoken with such certainty. No hand had ever reached out without wanting something in return. Her heart raced, torn between the instinct to retreat and the desperate need to believe, and she looked into his eyes, searching for cruelty but finding only a steady fire that refused to waver. Around them, the night seemed to hold its breath, the silence broken only by the distant sound of laughter spilling from the saloon, and the restless shifting of his horse outside, waiting for its master's command. Suspense twisted through her chest. Was it safe to trust him, or would he to betray her like every other promise that had been shattered? And yet, when his hand extended, not to take but to offer, she felt a flicker of hope she thought had died long ago. The town would not allow it, she knew. Whispers would turn into rage. Men would rise with fists and weapons, but in this moment none of that mattered. Her babies whimpered against her chest, their tiny hands grasping for warmth, and she realized that if she stayed, they would never know life beyond pain. With trembling resolve, she lifted her gaze, and though her voice was faint, Her silence broke with the smallest nod. The rancher did not hesitate. He bent low, lifting her gently, his arms strong yet tender, holding not just her but the fragile future she carried. Behind them, danger loomed, but ahead was a chance, uncertain and perilous, yet brighter than the darkness she was leaving behind. Her body was weak, her arms trembling as she clutched her babies close, but when the rancher lifted her gently onto his horse, a strength she thought she had lost flickered back inside her, fragile yet alive. The horse shifted beneath them, its breath heavy in the cold night, while behind them shadows moved and whispers turned sharp, rising from the town like a storm gathering on the horizon. Faces appeared at windows, voices muttered threats, and footsteps echoed against the dirt, but the rancher did not falter, his jaw set, his eyes fixed ahead, as though nothing in the world could turn him back. She pressed her children tighter against her chest, their tiny whimpers drowned by the pounding of her own heart, and though fear clawed at her, hope stirred within her for the first time, fragile but real. The town's anger grew louder, shouts carried on the wind, the clatter of boots chasing after them. Yet the rancher's hand remained steady on the reins, guiding the horse forward with a determination that silenced her doubts. Every stride pulled them further from cruelty. Every breath of the horse carried them closer to something she had never dared to imagine: freedom. The road stretched endlessly into the dark plains, the moon casting a pale glow across the fields. And for the first time in years, the night did not feel like a prison, but like a passage to another life. She dared to glance back, seeing figures fading into the distance, their threats swallowed by the wind, and though fear lingered, it no longer controlled her. The rancher glanced at her briefly, his eyes steady, his silence louder than any promise, and in that look she understood he would never let her fall, never let her children be broken by the world she was leaving behind. Tears slipped down her bruised cheeks, not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming weight of relief, from the fragile hope that tomorrow could be different. The babies stirred in her arms, their tiny faces pressed into her chest, their breaths warm against her skin, and she whispered softly, as if to them and to herself, words she had long kept buried: "We are safe now." The wind whipped through her hair, the land stretched wide and untamed around them, and the sound of the horse's hooves became a rhythm of survival, a song of escape carrying them further from the life that had nearly destroyed her. For the first time she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to feel the cold air not as punishment, but as promise. And as the rancher guided them into the vast unknown, the woman closed her eyes, holding her children tightly, her voice trembling yet filled with quiet strength as the night carried her final thought. Sometimes, in the loneliest lands of Montana, the most broken souls find each other and heal.